The lesson no money could buy. Marcus Webb stood in the emergency room corridor, his hands still trembling as he stared at the blood staining his Italian leather shoes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, while the antiseptic smell burned his nostrils. He'd just signed the discharge papers for his assistant, who'd collapsed from exhaustion after working 72 hours straight to close a deal that would net Marcus another few million. The young man's face had been gray, his lips blue, and Marcus had felt nothing but irritation at the inconvenience. His mobile rang for the 100th time that evening. The screen displayed his ex-wife's number. He declined it, just as he'd declined the previous 99 calls. She wanted to discuss their daughter's birthday, wanted him to actually show up this time. But Marcus had a meeting in Singapore that couldn't be moved. At least, that's what he told himself as he strode through the automatic doors into the cold Melbourne night. The property development business had been good to Marcus. Too good, perhaps. At 43, he owned half of Toorak, drove a Bentley, and wore watches worth more than most people's houses. He'd grown up in Frankston, the son of a factory worker and a nurse, and he'd sworn he'd never be poor again. That promise had cost him his marriage, his relationship with his daughter, and according to his doctor, was well on its way to costing him his health. But none of that mattered as he loosened his tie and headed toward his car. The parkade was nearly empty, his Bentley gleaming under the stark lighting like a trophy. He was about to unlock it when his phone buzzed with an alert. A property in the Dandenong Ranges, one he'd been trying to acquire for months, had just become available. The owner had finally agreed to sell. Marcus's pulse quickened with the familiar rush of a deal coming together. He pulled up the coordinates, his mind already calculating the subdivision potential, the profit margins. The property was isolated, surrounded by mountain ash forest, completely impractical for anyone who actually wanted to live there. But Marcus didn't see trees or wildlife or natural beauty. He saw dollar signs, 15 luxury townhouses, maybe 20 if he could get the council to approve higher density. Without thinking twice, he got in his car and started driving. It was nearly midnight, but Marcus Webb didn't operate on normal people's schedules. He worked when opportunities presented themselves, and this opportunity had been 18 months in the making. The owner was elderly, sentimental about the land, had inherited it from his parents. Marcus had been patient, waiting for the right moment, the right pressure point. Now, the old man was in a nursing home, and his son just wanted the property sold. The drive took him east, away from the city lights, and into the darkness of the Dandenongs. The road twisted and climbed, the Bentley's headlights cutting through the fog that clung to the mountain. Marcus had the address programmed into his GPS, but the device seemed confused by the remote location, recalculating every few minutes. His phone rang again. His daughter. He let it go to voicemail. The fog grew thicker as he climbed higher, the temperature dropping noticeably. Marcus turned up the heat, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. He should have waited until morning, should have brought someone with him. But the thought of losing this deal to another developer was unbearable. The GPS announced he'd arrived at his destination, but there was nothing there except trees and darkness. Marcus squinted through the windscreen, looking for a driveway, a mailbox, any sign of the property. He crept forward slowly, the Bentley's undercarriage scraping occasionally on the rough gravel road. Then his headlights caught something. A break in the trees, what looked like an overgrown track leading deeper into the forest. Marcus turned in, branches scraping against his paintwork, making him wince. The track was barely wider than his car, thick with fallen leaves and debris. He'd gone perhaps 100 meters when the Bentley lurched violently to one side. There was a sickening crack, and suddenly the car was listing at a sharp angle. Marcus swore, his heart pounding. He'd driven into some kind of ditch or hole, hidden beneath the leaves. He tried to reverse, but the wheels just spun uselessly. The car was stuck fast, the passenger side tilted down at what felt like a 45-degree angle. Marcus killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, his breath coming fast. The fog pressed against the windows like something alive. His mobile had no signal. Of course it didn't. Marcus grabbed his phone and got out, his expensive shoes immediately sinking into mud. The temperature had dropped further, his breath visible in the air. He walked around the Bentley, surveying the damage. The passenger side was buried in what looked like an old drainage ditch, completely hidden by vegetation. He'd need a tow truck, and good luck getting one out here in the middle of the night with no phone signal. He was standing there, trying to decide whether to walk back down the mountain or wait in the car, when he heard it. A sound that made every hair on his body stand on end. A whimper, weak and desperate. It came from somewhere ahead, deeper in the forest. Marcus hesitated, his rational mind telling him to get back in the car and lock the doors. But there was something about that sound, something that bypassed all his carefully constructed walls and went straight to a part of him he'd thought was long dead. He turned on his phone's torch and started walking, the beam cutting through the fog in a narrow cone of light. The ground was uneven, littered with fallen branches and hidden roots that threatened to trip him with every step. His suit jacket caught on something, tearing, but he barely noticed. The whimpering came again, closer now. Marcus swept the torch beam back and forth, searching. Then he saw it. A dog. A young Labrador, golden-furred and covered in mud, lying in a shallow depression beside a massive fallen tree. Even from a distance, Marcus could see it was injured. One of its back legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was blood matting its fur. The dog's eyes found his torch beam, and in them Marcus saw something he recognized. Fear, yes, but also a desperate, stubborn will to survive. The same look he'd seen in his own eyes every morning when he was young and hungry and determined to claw his way out of poverty. He approached slowly, hands raised. The dog tried to move, tried to drag itself away, but the injured leg wouldn't support its weight. It whimpered again, the sound cutting through Marcus like a knife. "Easy, mate," Marcus heard himself say, his voice softer than it had been in years. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog watched him with those intelligent brown eyes, panting rapidly. Marcus could see it was exhausted, probably had been lying here for days. There was no collar, no identification, just a young dog, alone and terrified in the darkness. Marcus knelt in the mud beside it, his $1,000 suit forgotten. Up close, he could see the full extent of the injuries. The leg was definitely broken, and there were cuts and scrapes all over its body. But worse than the physical injuries was the look in the dog's eyes, abandoned, forgotten, left to die alone in the forest. Something shifted inside Marcus as he looked into those eyes. He'd spent 20 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that sentiment was weakness, that caring was a liability. But this dog, this abandoned creature fighting for its life in the darkness, cracked something open in him that he thought had calcified long ago. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, surprised by the thickness in his own voice. He shrugged off his suit jacket and carefully wrapped it around the dog's shivering body. The animal flinched at first, then seemed to understand he meant no harm. Marcus could feel the rapid heartbeat through the fabric, could see the exhaustion in every line of the dog's body. His mind shifted into the same problem-solving mode that had made him millions. The car was stuck. No phone signal. At least 5 kilometers back to the main road, maybe more. And a severely injured dog that couldn't walk. Marcus looked down at his hands, the same hands that signed contracts worth millions, that shook hands with politicians and developers, that had forgotten what it felt like to actually help something living and breathing. He made a decision. Carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones, Marcus slid his arms under the dog. The animal whimpered as he lifted, the broken leg hanging uselessly, but it didn't try to bite. Instead, it pressed its muddy head against Marcus's chest, as if understanding that this human was its only chance. The dog was heavier than he expected, maybe 25 kilos, and the broken leg made it awkward to carry. Marcus adjusted his grip, cradling the animal against his chest like he used to carry his daughter when she was small. That memory hit him like a punch to the gut. How long had it been since he'd held Emma? Since he'd been present for anything that mattered. He started walking back toward the Bentley, his feet sliding in the mud, his breath coming hard. The dog's warmth seeped through his shirt, and he could feel it trembling. Every few steps, he had to stop and readjust his grip, his arms burning with the effort. His expensive watch caught on the dog's fur, the crystal face scratching against matted hair. When he reached the car, Marcus opened the back door and carefully laid the dog on the leather seats. The animal's muddy paws and bloody fur immediately stained the pristine interior. 6 months ago, he would have been furious. Now, he couldn't bring himself to care. He grabbed a bottle of water from the center console and poured some into his cupped hand. The dog lapped at it desperately, its pink tongue rough against his palm. Marcus poured more, then more, until the bottle was empty. He found an old gym towel in the boot and gently cleaned some of the mud and blood from the dog's face. "We're going to get you help," he said, more to himself than to the dog. "I promise." But how? The car was still stuck, and even if he could get it out, the nearest vet would be back in the city, over an hour away. Marcus checked his phone again. Still no signal. He walked a few meters in each direction, holding it up, but nothing. The dog whimpered from the back seat, a sound of pure pain that made Marcus's chest tighten. He climbed into the driver's seat and tried the engine. It turned over, but when he put it in reverse, the wheels just spun in the mud. He tried rocking it forward and back, but the Bentley only settled deeper into the ditch. Marcus hit the steering wheel in frustration, then immediately felt guilty as the dog flinched at the sound. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. The property. The one he'd come to see. There had to be a house, a structure of some kind. Maybe there'd be a phone or at least better shelter than the car. He got out and shone his torch ahead, following the overgrown track. About 50 meters further in, he could make out the shape of a building through the trees. A small weatherboard cottage, dark and seemingly abandoned, but it was something. Marcus went back to the car and carefully lifted the dog again. The animal was calmer now, its breathing steadier, as if it trusted him. That trust felt like a weight and a gift all at once. He carried it toward the cottage, his muscles screaming in protest, his dress shoes completely ruined. The cottage was old, probably from the 1950s, with a sagging veranda and peeling paint. The front door was locked, but Marcus found a window that gave way with a firm shove. He climbed through, then carefully passed the dog through after him. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but it was dry and out of the wind. Marcus used his phone's torch to explore. The furniture was old, but still intact, covered in dust sheets. There was a wood-burning stove in the corner, and miraculously, a stack of dry firewood beside it. He laid the dog on an old sofa, tucking his ruined suit jacket around it more snugly. Then he set about starting a fire. It had been decades since he'd done this, not since camping trips with his father, before the old man's back gave out and the factory laid him off. But the memory was there, muscle memory his hands still knew. Soon, flames were crackling in the stove, warmth beginning to seep into the room. Marcus found an old quilt in a cupboard and wrapped it around the dog, who had started shivering violently now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He sat on the floor beside the sofa, one hand resting on the dog's head, feeling the soft fur beneath the dried mud. The dog's eyes were closed now, but its breathing was labored. The broken leg needed to be set, needed proper veterinary care, but all Marcus could do was keep it warm and wait for dawn. His phone battery was at 15%. He turned it off to conserve power, plunging them into darkness broken only by the orange glow of the fire. In that moment, sitting on the dusty floor of an abandoned cottage, his expensive clothes ruined, his car stuck in a ditch, Marcus Webb felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He stroked the dog's head gently, and it made a small sound, almost a sigh. How long had it been since anything had relied on him like this? His business partners needed his money. His employees needed their paychecks. His ex-wife needed child support. But this dog needed him. Marcus, the person. Not his money, or his influence, or his connections. Just his presence, his warmth, his care. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Marcus found himself talking to the dog, his voice low and steady. "I had a daughter, you know. Still do, I suppose, though I haven't been much of a father. Emma. She used to beg me for a dog when she was little. Every birthday, every Christmas. But I was always too busy, always had an excuse. Too much work, too much travel, too much responsibility." The dog's ear twitched at the sound of his voice. "I told myself I was building something for her, securing her future. But really, I was just scared. Scared of being poor again, of ending up like my old man, broken and discarded. So I worked and worked and worked, and I told myself it was for her. But it wasn't. It was for me. For the kid from Frankston who never had anything." His throat tightened with emotions he'd suppressed for decades. "And you know what I got for all that work? A daughter who doesn't return my calls. An ex-wife who looks at me like I'm a stranger. A mansion I'm never in. A car stuck in a bloody ditch." He laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "But you, mate, you don't care about any of that, do you? You don't care that I own half of Turak, or drive a Bentley, or have 7 figures in my bank account. You just needed someone to not leave you behind." The dog's breathing had evened out, the warmth of the fire and the quilt doing their work. Marcus checked the leg as gently as he could. It was definitely broken, but the bone hadn't broken through the skin. That was something. The bleeding from the cuts had mostly stopped as well. Hours passed. Marcus dozed intermittently, jerking awake each time the dog whimpered, or the fire needed more wood. His back ached from sitting on the hard floor, his suit was beyond saving, and his phone was dead. But he didn't move from his spot beside the sofa. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the dirty windows. Marcus's entire body ached, his neck stiff from the awkward position he'd slept in. But the dog was still breathing, still warm under the quilt. Its eyes opened as the light grew stronger, finding Marcus's face, and there was something different in them now. Not fear. Recognition. Trust. "Morning, mate," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "We made it through the night." He checked his phone. Still dead. But with daylight, he had options. He could walk back to the main road, flag down a car, get help. The thought of leaving the dog even for an hour made his chest tighten, but it was the only way to save it. He made sure the fire was banked, that the dog was warm and comfortable, then forced himself to stand. Every muscle protested. He was 43, not 23. And a night on a hard floor had reminded him of that fact. "I'll be back," he promised, running his hand along the dog's head one more time. "I swear it." The walk back down the mountain took over an hour. His feet blistered in his ruined dress shoes, his suit jacket long abandoned back at the cottage. When he finally reached the main road, the sun was fully up, and he must have looked like a madman, covered in mud and blood, his expensive clothes torn and filthy. The first car that passed slowed down, an elderly woman at the wheel looking concerned. Marcus flagged her down desperately. "Please, I need help. There's an injured dog. I need to get to a vet." The woman hesitated, clearly wary of this wild-looking man, but something in his face must have convinced her. She handed him her mobile through a crack in the window. "There's a vet in Belgrave," she said, "about 15 minutes from here." Marcus's hands shook as he dialed. When the receptionist answered, the words tumbled out of him in a rush. An injured dog. Broken leg. Been outside all night. Please. He'd pay anything. Just please help. The vet, a man named Dr. Richardson, listened calmly and told him to bring the dog in immediately. Marcus handed the phone back to the woman and started running back up the mountain, his body screaming in protest. When he burst back into the cottage, the dog's tail thumped weakly against the sofa. It was the first time he'd seen it do that, and the simple gesture nearly broke him. "We're getting you out of here," he said, gathering the animal carefully in his arms once more. He made it back to the main road in 40 minutes, pure adrenaline driving him forward. A ute pulled over, a young tradie looking at him with wide eyes. "You right, mate?" "I need a lift to the vet in Belgrave." "Please." The young man took in the scene, the injured dog, Marcus's desperate expression, and nodded. "Jump in the back. I'll drive fast as I can." The trip to the vet passed in a blur. Marcus sat in the truck bed, the dog cradled against his chest, whispering reassurances that he hoped were true. When they pulled up to the clinic, Dr. Richardson was already waiting outside, a veterinary nurse beside him with a stretcher. They took the dog inside, and Marcus followed, refusing to leave its side. Dr. Richardson examined the leg, took X-rays, cleaned the wounds. The break was clean, he said. The dog was young, healthy, beneath the injuries. With proper care, it would heal completely. "Someone dumped him," the vet said quietly as he set the leg. "Probably thought he wasn't worth the vet bills. Happens more than you'd think." Marcus felt rage surge through him, white-hot and righteous. How could someone do that? How could someone just abandon a living creature to die alone? Then he thought about his assistant in the hospital, worked to exhaustion, about his daughter, abandoned in a different way, about all the people he'd stepped on or pushed aside in his climb to the top. Was he really any different? The surgery took 3 hours. Marcus sat in the waiting room, still covered in mud and blood, drawing curious stares from other clients. He didn't care. His phone was charging at the receptionist's desk, and when it finally powered on, he had 43 missed calls. Singapore, his ex-wife, his daughter, his business partners. He called his ex-wife first. "Sarah," he said when she answered. "I can't make Singapore. I need to talk to Emma. Is she there?" There was a long silence on the other end, then Sarah's voice, cautious and confused. "Marcus, are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine. Better than fine. Please, can I talk to Emma?" His daughter's voice, when she came on the line, was cold and distant. "What do you want, Dad?" Marcus closed his eyes. The words he'd been holding back for years, finally finding their way out. "I want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I've missed most of your life. I'm sorry I chose work over you, over everything that mattered. And I want to ask if you'd come visit me this weekend. There's someone I want you to meet." "Someone?" "A dog. I found him last night, and I'm going to keep him. And I was thinking, maybe you could help me name him. If you want to." Another long silence. And then Emma's voice, softer now, uncertain. "You got a dog?" "I did. And I'm going to need help learning how to take care of him properly. I thought maybe you could teach me. You always wanted one." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel the walls she'd built starting to crack, just like his had the night before. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll come this weekend." When Dr. Richardson brought the dog out, its leg properly set and wrapped, Marcus stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. The dog's tail wagged when it saw him, and this time there was strength behind it. "He's going to need careful monitoring for the next few weeks," the vet said. "Keep the leg dry, limited movement, pain medication twice a day. I've written it all down for you." "Whatever he needs," Marcus said. "Cost doesn't matter." Dr. Richardson smiled. "The bill's already been taken care of. The young bloke who drove you here came back and paid it. Said anyone who'd carry an injured dog down a mountain deserved a break." Marcus felt his throat close up. He managed to nod, unable to speak. He carried the dog outside into the bright morning. The world looked different somehow, sharper and more real. He thought about the property in the Dandenongs, the deal he'd been so desperate to close. He'd call the owner's son later, tell him he'd changed his mind. That land deserved to stay wild, to stay whole. Some things were worth more than their subdivision potential. A taxi pulled up, and Marcus climbed in carefully, the dog settling across his lap. As they drove back toward the city, he looked down at the animal that had changed everything. The dog looked back at him with those intelligent brown eyes, and Marcus understood something he'd spent 20 years trying to ignore. The most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold or leveraged. They could only be earned through presence, through care, through showing up when it mattered. This dog hadn't needed his money or his business acumen or his connections. It had needed his humanity, the part of himself he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed. His phone buzzed with another call from Singapore. Marcus declined it and turned off the phone entirely. The deal could wait. Everything could wait. "I think I'll call you Lucky," he said to the dog, stroking its head gently, "because that's what we both are." The dog's tail thumped against his leg, and Marcus smiled. It was a real smile, the kind he hadn't felt on his face in longer than he could remember, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and true. The taxi driver caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "That's a fine-looking dog you've got there, mate." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "He really is." As they drove through the suburbs, past the houses and shops and people starting their ordinary days, Marcus Webb understood the lesson that no amount of money could have taught him. Success wasn't measured in properties owned or deals closed or zeros in a bank account. It was measured in moments like this, in second chances, in choosing to be present, in learning that it was never too late to remember what it meant to be human. The dog shifted in his lap, pressing its head against his chest, and Marcus held it close. He thought about Emma coming this weekend, about teaching her to care for Lucky, about rebuilding something he'd thought was lost forever. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it would be real. And that, he realized, as the morning sun streamed through the taxi window, warming his face and the dog sleeping peacefully in his arms, was worth more than anything he'd ever owned. Some lessons couldn't be bought. Some had to be found in the darkness, in the mud, in the desperate eyes of a creature that taught you how to feel again. Marcus looked down at Lucky one more time, at the rise and fall of its breathing, at the trust in its relaxed body. This was what he'd been missing. This was what mattered. This was the lesson no money could buy.